Hi folks, Steve Nixon here at Logic FX Trading, and welcome to our building block series where we're learning Elliott wave theory as a prelude to the competent trader training and mentoring programs. In this second video about corrective waves, we'll be looking at triangles, their various types, Elliott's rules for them, and where you're most likely to find them. We'll also do a little bit of analysis at the end where we'll compare a triangle with an ending diagonal. So let's get on with it. So here we have a generic triangle. As with everything we've learned so far, we're only looking at this in a bull market. For a bear market, basically everything's exactly the same except it's reversed. And the reason we're only looking at it in one direction is just to keep it simple, guys, so that we can build up our knowledge as we go along, and then as we start getting into analysis and what have you, we can identify them in a bear market as well. Okay, let's get on with it. Our generic triangle structure here is a 5-wave structure with sub-waves of 3, 3, 3, 3, 3. So it's 5 3-wave structure. And it's labelled A, B, C, D, E. A, B, C, D, E, with each of these having 3 waves in them. The sub-waves overlap. So B and A overlap. B and C overlap A and B, C and D overlap B and C, and D and E overlap C and D. There are exceptions, as with everything, but we'll look at those as we go along. It can develop into 9 waves, which basically means most of the time when a 9-wave structure turns up, E wave is in itself a 5-wave structure. In other words, the E wave here is a further triangle. Now we can have variations in the C wave as well, but as I say, we'll look at that later on. So it can be 9 waves. We draw the structure by linking the end of wave B to the end of wave D, and the end of wave A to the end of wave C, and that gives us our structure. Now we haven't talked about trend lines and structure lines, etc. yet, but this is just a little bit of an introduction to it. And position, well, they're generally found in the 4th wave of an impulse or B waves of corrections, and we'll look at that later on as well. And then there are 3/4 variations, which are contracting, barrier, expanding, and running. And the reason we have a question mark after running here is because it isn't really a standalone triangle, it's a version of a contracting triangle. That's why we get 3/4. So there we have it. This is our generic triangle structure. Okay, let's move on to our next slide. So here we have our contracting triangle. And as you can see, we've put in the subwaves here. So there's 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 5 threes as we say, and as we also said, this may on rare occasions turn into a triangle in itself, giving us a total of 9 waves. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5 in here, that's 9. Here's our impulse coming in, here's our next impulse on its way out. And the reason it's contracting, as you can see, because price on both the top and the bottom side put in higher lows and lower highs. So we start here, lower high, lower high. This is basically a sideways movement, and it's associated with lower volume. And it basically represents an indecision within the market between price going up and price going down, and there's a bit of a battle going on, and it basically ranges and slowly but surely comes down to a point where a decision's made. Are we going long? Are we going short? Okay, let's have a look at our barrier. Okay, so here we have our barrier triangle. So the reason it's called a barrier triangle is because it appears as if there's a barrier to price moving any higher or lower in a bear market. So price comes up, it tests the previous price, comes back down again. It comes back up, it tests the previous price, it comes back down again. But the momentum with which it comes down is slowly getting weaker and weaker and weaker until eventually we get to the point where it breaks through and moves on up or on down in a bear market. So here we have the same thing, internal structure still a 3, still all zigzags, except where we've talked about this can be a triangle and this can be a flat. Price internally overlapping, in other words, that is inside that, that is inside that, that is inside that, etc., etc. And the difference between this and a contracting flat is that the top here is flat and the bottom is rising, and vice versa on a bear market. So here we have an expanding triangle, and as you can see, even though it's a triangular shape, price expands away from the end of the impulse or the end of the motive wave. So we have a short A compared with B, where price extends beyond the top of our impulse. Then we have C coming down, which extends beyond the end of A. D comes up and extends again, and C comes down again. So the whole structure is expanding. But where it's similar to previous triangles is that if we have a bull market coming in, we have a bull market going out, and vice versa. We still have an internal 3, 3, 3, 3. Price is externally overlapping. In other words, price gets larger. They overlap one another. So C overlaps A, but it's bigger than it. And D overlaps C, but it's bigger than it. So they overlap externally rather than internally, where they're getting smaller. And the top and the bottom both diverge. So that's your expanding triangle. Okay, so far we've had our barrier triangle, our contracting triangle, and our expanding triangle. And now we have our fourth type here, which is a running triangle. And in this case, it's a variation of a contracting triangle. In other words, price is still contracting, price internally overlaps, but we have a push up here beyond the end of our motive wave. So price extends beyond the end of the motive wave, but it still overlaps internally. So it looks like a contracting triangle from here on, but in our first wave it extends, our second wave, our B wave, extends beyond the end of our impulse. And just as we had with our contracting triangle, bottom and top converge, with the bottom rising and the top falling once we've had a completion of B wave. Okay. Now we have a look at where do we find triangles, because obviously that's very, very important. Because if we know where we find them, then it gives us an idea of where we are in the process, where price is most likely to go next. So here we have our impulse, and as we know, it's a motive wave, corrective wave, motive wave, corrective wave, motive wave. And in wave 4 position, we can often find a triangle. So as we saw earlier, price comes in, then we get our correction, and price continues on up into our fifth wave. So recognizing this triangle in this position is very, very important, because obviously we've got good opportunity to get a trade here. And the other place that we'll find a triangle is in a B wave position. So A's come down, and here we have our triangle in our B, and then we get our C. This is a zigzag, guys. But we also find them at the end of complex corrections, and we haven't looked at those yet, but we'll look at them next, and then we can see the next position where we find triangles. So now we'll have a little look at some analysis, because simply learning rule after rule can be very boring and not very motivational. So let's have a look at the importance of what we're learning when it comes to forecasting where price is most likely to go next. Now here we have a running triangle and an ending diagonal. So let's see how we can distinguish one from another and how getting it wrong will result in a losing trade. Now just like a triangle, an ending diagonal has 5 waves whose subwave structure are all 3s. This is a 3, that's a 3, that's a 3, that's a 3. Essentially, they're both made up of a series of zigzags, with a few rare exceptions, which we'll take a look at later. Now, as price develops, one could be mistaken for the other. So how do we go about knowing the difference? Well, if we look at these diagrams, we can see that in the D position here, price does not extend beyond B, it contracts. And in every other triangle except an expanding triangle, price will contract. And as we can see in the leading diagonal, when we get to a similar position, if this was in development like this, A, B, C, our D would have to be there and our E would have to be there if it was an expanding triangle. But the fact that the next wave goes to there and the next wave comes only to there makes it a diagonal rather than a triangle. Now, what's so important about knowing the difference between one and another? And just as a matter of interest, Elliott used to describe these as diagonal triangles. And the importance of telling the difference between the two is this: as price comes in here, this will be in a wave 4 position if this has been an impulse coming up. So where's price going to go next? It's going to go here and give us our 5th wave. Whereas if we mixed it up with the leading diagonal and we looked for a 5th wave, not realizing we've already had it, and price is going to do this, takes on the opposite direction. So if we mix up a running triangle with an ending diagonal, you can see that whereas in this situation we would be looking for a nice impulsive wave up, we would end up getting a massive corrective move down. The reason I'm pointing this out now is that drawing a little diagram like this, it's very easy to see that what this is and what this is. But when we're looking for this on a developing price chart, you can very easily become mixed up between one and the other. So by talking about it here, it puts it in your mind. So be careful and keep an open mind whenever you're labeling a structure, because it's very, very easy to get it wrong unless you have an open mind. And that's why I call trading analysis dynamic trading analysis, because we have to constantly analyze what's going on before we make a forecast. And we need to be sure that what we're looking at is what we've identified it as. Okay folks, that's enough information for one day. So we'll end it there and pick up the story again in the next video, where we'll look at how corrective waves combine to form more complex structures called doubles and triples. I'm Steve Nixon, and thank you for watching.